Joey, this is not the first time an airplane has smashed into New York City's tallest skyscraper. The date was July 28, 1945. A U.S. military plane lost in the fog smashed into the 79th story of the Empire State Building, which was then the tallest building in New York City, and ironically once again is the tallest building in New York City. 14 people were killed when that happened. Now, for many New Yorkers, particularly those over 60 years old who remember that, it was deja vu when they were watching television and saw the first plane smash into the North Tower of the World Trade Center. People thought it was an accident, but a few minutes later, when the second plane came in, they realized this was much different. The only things these incidents had in common were that aviation equipment smashed into tall buildings. And now, many New Yorkers, 4 days later, are starting to get used to the fact that this terrible thing has happened in their city. Behind me, where the World Trade Center complex used to stand, there are fires still burning. There is smoke still steaming. You may be wondering, why can't they put the fires out? What happens is they put a fire out, then they raise steel and metal. It provides oxygen to an area, and more fires start, and that's the scenario. The bad news, no survivors have been found today. No survivors were found yesterday. No survivors the day before. But, and this is very important, many officials here still believe, and they're not just saying this to make people feel better, they still believe there's a possibility that people could be alive. They believe people could be 60 feet below all the wreckage. The problem is they just can't get to it. A very heartening sight I saw just a little while ago, about 8 blocks away from here, that's about a half a mile away, on the corner of West Street and Canal Street. That's the place where the public's allowed to be right now. They can't be any further south than that. There's about 500 to 700 people standing, cheering for the rescue workers as the rescue workers leave this restricted area. This isn't like an organized celebration for these rescue workers. It's not like a Yankee parade after they win the World Series where people know to come somewhere at an appointed time. These are people who have just decided to show up and thank the workers who have worked so hard to try to find survivors. Joey, back to you.
Gary, let me ask you, because I have read that New York has turned into something of a very, very big, very small town, that there is sort of this outpouring of strangers trying to help out other strangers in the midst of this crisis. It's certainly not, frankly, the image that we generally associate with New Yorkers.
I'll tell you, I used to live in New York City. I lived here 10 years. Yes, I did. And I find that New Yorkers are much more friendly than people give them credit for. But I will also tell you that I've never seen a more friendlier time than the past several days.
This area also of Lower Manhattan, much of it has been closed off, as you have said, with the emergency efforts underway in that area. But there is some residential around there, isn't there? And some of those people have not even been able to return to their homes?
That's exactly right, Joey. And what's happened is people are given the opportunity to go to their homes for a short amount of time, to take animals, to take things they need in the house, and then they're encouraged to leave the area. If you are stubborn about it and want to stay in your home, they will let you, but pretty much it's vacant in this area right now.
CNN's Gary Tuchman, very close to the World Trade Center site where the work does continue. Gary noting that there was still a sense of hope that there might be still people who are surviving, still need to be rescued underneath as well. I should note that we heard from Dr. Sanjay Gupta at one of the hospitals in New York saying that the emergency workers there believe that there is still a chance, still holding out the best of hopes for those who might still be trapped alive in the World Trade Center rubble. Wolf?
And Joey, for all those people in New York, clearly with time, it does not get any easier at all. For now, thanks so much for watching. I'm Wolf Blitzer in Washington.
And I'm Joey Chena at CNN Center in Atlanta. A little more perspective and views of what might be ahead for America in its new war. Now from the Capitol Gang.
Welcome to Capitol Gang. I'm Mark Shields with the full Capitol Gang. Al Hunt, Robert Novak, Kate O'Byrne, and Margaret Carlson. Partisanship was laid aside as President Bush and Congress quickly doubled the $20 billion emergency appropriation.
I particularly want to thank the President and the staff of the White House, the OMB, who understood our request.
We could quibble for days or for weeks. We could argue the legalisms. We could parse over every word. But the Senate, united like I have never seen it before, chose not to do that.
But in the House late last night, emergency aid for distressed airlines was blocked by the objection of Democratic Congressman Lloyd Doggett of Texas.
Tonight, before all the bodies are removed, before the dust is settled, before perhaps all the fires are extinguished, there are those that are lining up here at the Capitol door at the public treasury asking that they receive some public subsidy right out of the Social Security fund.
We have airline industry on the verge of collapse. And if we don't lay down a mark in the sand and say, yes, we're willing because of action of our government, back up those airline industries for the loss of monies, they will start going down.
Tougher security was imposed in the nation's capital and at airports.
We will discontinue curbside check-in at the airport, and passengers will be required to go to the ticket counters to check in.
We are a free people, and the purpose of terrorism is to terrorize. It's to alter behavior, and to the extent free people have to alter their behavior, they're no longer free.
Bob Novak, is our freedom being curtailed?
Yes, it is, and it isn't a question of making sacrifice. I don't understand how abolishing airport check-ins at the curbside hurts the terrorists at all. I don't understand how closing down Reagan Airport, National Airport, perhaps permanently, hurts the terrorists at all. And I don't understand how making life more difficult for Americans enable us to win this war, but there's something more important than that, and that's the economy. We're not producing any automobiles in this country right now because you can't get the airbags, which are all made in Europe, to come in. There are no automobiles being made, and I really believe that it isn't a question of a greedy airline. It's these airlines, which are vital to the American economy, may go under, and it's just outrageous to talk about this nonsense about a Social Security fund as a reason for not bailing them out.
Margaret, in the rubble of Tuesday, what other casualties do you see?
Yeah, well, we've lost a few other things than our economic health. There was a looming recession anyway. 350 firefighters, those people who run back into burning buildings and not away from them, and 50 policemen. Any sense of safety or certainty. 5,000 people, none found today. And we proceed without any sense that it's over. And I think the freedoms that some freedoms we are going to have to get up. Pennsylvania Avenue's never going to be reopened now. Is the cost of trying to deal with that. Bob's right, curbside check-in isn't going to do much, and airport security, it's like a cliche of journalism to get onto the tarmac. But Bush said today, he let the word out that he wants the football games and the baseball games to come back and to play as soon as possible because he does want the world to go on and for, as Rumsfeld said, us not to be giving in to terrorists by not living life.
But we've been endlessly told, Mark, in a distant time, you're more likely to be hit by lightning than you are to be killed by a terrorist. Well, I don't have a friend who I've ever lost through a lightning strike, but I have a dear friend who a terrorist has now murdered, and there are thousands of Americans who've now had that same experience, dear friends and family murdered by terrorists. So that's one canard we won't be hearing any longer. And it struck in America in a way none of us could have ever expected. As a result, in some part, perhaps, to a colossal intelligence failure. One of the things, Mark, that obviously people are going to be looking into in the weeks ahead. I don't know if there's an institutional problem with our intelligence services, whether or not the liberals have so stymied them in the kinds of methods they can use. Is it a lack of resources, although they get $30 billion a year? But that's just one of the many things that Americans are going to be asking, I think, when they begin getting over the shock and heartbreak of this week.
Al Hunt.
Mark, I think you have to make a distinction between inconvenience and maybe even impositions and basic infringements. And I think that's what we have to be very careful about over the next couple months. I think making airline travel harder, tougher, longer in this country is an imposition. I don't like it, but so be it. We're going to have to be like El Al. If we're going to have a war on terrorism, it really requires a war on terrorism, and we're going to have to do that. And people, it's going to be inconvenient. What is a real issue, and not just a matter of convenience, is things like more wiretapping. You know, what kind of infringements are we going to have on Americans? And I think that's a very real issue. Finally, I would say, Bob, you may be right about the airlines. I don't know. But darn it, the House of Representatives shouldn't pass that in 34 minutes. If we're going to be handing out multi-billion-dollar bailouts, let's have hearings, let's talk about it, let's act on it. God bless Lloyd Doggett. He was right.
I think he was very wrong. I think this was only an authorization. It wasn't an appropriation. No money came out, but it would give a boost to them to start operating again. I think Continental Airlines could go under because of this. And I really believe that if we have a meltdown of the great American economy because of these bloody terrorists, of course, Margaret, we mourn these brave firemen and policemen. But if they have succeeded. They have succeeded if they bring this economy to its knees. And I think we're in a very dangerous position right now where we have, for security reasons, closed down the airline industry.
But now, let me just get this straight. The economy was in trouble heading into Tuesday.
Not this kind of trouble.
But I mean, it's hard to accept that 5 days of the economy stopping is somehow going to tip it over. And what it basically turns out now politically is it becomes that it's not George Bush's economy, or the Republicans' economy, or anybody else's economy. It's the terrorist economy, and therefore they're the ones you can run against.
Well, we're not talking about running, Mark. For once, let's not talk about running in the election. Let's talk about the American economy and whether this is a great victory for the terrorists who hate capitalism and hate this country.
Bob, I'm sorry. I mean, the idea that this is the capitalist failure brought on by the terrorist act is hard to believe. You accept that, Al?
No, I don't. I don't think that these were people who hate modern life. I mean, they hate women to have rights. They hate democracy. They hate all sorts of things. And the fact that we're a capitalist society just
it's only a piece of it. We are the object of this murderous hate because we are powerful, because we are rich, because we are modern, because we are Christian, because we are good, as President Bush said this week. That's why we're the object of this murderous hate.
We support the right of the State of Israel to exist.
Right. On the day of the terrorist attack, President Bush issued a warning to Afghanistan for playing host to terrorist leader Osama bin Laden.
We will make no distinction between the terrorists who committed these acts and those who harbor them.
Elaborated today.
They will try to hide. They will try to avoid the United States and our allies. But we're not going to let them.
The U.S. government came close to identifying Osama bin Laden as the guilty party.
We have not yet identified Osama bin Laden as the direct perpetrator, but the evidence, we have a lot of evidence is mounting, which will allow us to determine in the near future who it is. But he certainly is the leader of that kind of organization.
Meanwhile, members of Congress assailed the CIA for another intelligence failure. Margaret Carlson, is President Bush ready to attack Afghanistan?
Mark, he's ready, as we all are, but he's probably not able at this moment, other than perhaps to drop a few feel-good bombs, because it's not going to be easy. It's going to require ground troops, and it's going to require alliances that we don't yet have. The one thing he said this week, which sets up what has to happen, is if you're not with us, you're against us. There's no middle ground now. And, you know, Pakistan is going to have to become the 51st state, or we're going to treat it as Osama bin Ladenistan. And they're going to be our enemy as well. But to get these alliances so that we can get into Afghanistan and root him out is going to take things we're not good at. That terrain and how he's hidden and how that network operates, as someone said, is a general's nightmare and a guerrilla's dream.
Kate O'Byrne.
Well, Afghanistan should maybe be made to find him and turn him over to us. I think the president was exactly right, and I think it's exactly what the way the public now views this, and the early signs are our allies certainly agree. You're either with us or against us on this one. So I think we can expect and deserve the kind of cooperation he's going to need. Certainly it's not going to be easy, but look, in the past we've fought terrorism, and we've had a war against terrorism, in case you haven't noticed, for years now, with lawsuits and resolutions and diplomacy. And the polls tell us, and I'm not surprised to see it, that the public is 100% practically in favor of a massive military response. to this attack on us.
A massive military response, Bob, but I mean, I come back to what Margaret said. You're talking about troops on the ground. You're talking about occupation. You're not talking about some done at 30,000 feet above, 10 miles away, antiseptically.
Let's try to put this in perspective.
Yeah.
After all the talk that's gone on all this week, I will bet you there are no